Good evening, everyone. You caught me fixing my curtain. It's Gordon Causey, as always, live and unscripted tonight. Nothing written out. It's now the 28th. So we've rolled into Thursday, the 28th of December. It's just after midnight Eastern Standard Time. Doesn't matter. This video that I'm doing probably isn't going to be time sensitive. It's not related to any current events or anything of that nature. But wading into the ongoing debate of creation versus evolution, which is a debate that has been going on for centuries. Right now. Speak. 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 There we go. Got my coffee. This is probably going to be a little long-winded, and it's going to be a stream of conscious video where I'm just sharing my thoughts on creation versus evolution. And in the title, I said why creationism or the creationist view is wrong. I did that on purpose. I figured it might trigger those who hold the creationist view to watch. And at the same time, it might spur those who are of a evolutionary view to go, oh, good, someone's going to confirm. Here's a chance for me to get into my echo chamber, and here's some arguments that I can use when I come up against those dumb creationists. I don't want to give away what I believe right off the bat. I think it'll become evident as time goes on. And if you've watched my previous videos, you should have a good sense as to what I believe anyway, because repeatedly throughout my videos, I'm quite assertive in proclaiming my Christian faith and acknowledging Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. So that gives it away right there. I have a creationist view. However, it's nuanced, which is something lacking in today's world. We live in a world of black and white, of right and wrong, very polarized, binary world, and which is not healthy. We want to rush to conclusions. And when it comes to science, I actually enjoy science. I like science. Science is an investigative process, a very slow, grinding, meticulous process. And it evolves. Our understandings evolve. But I'm concerned, I think that evolution in terms of scientific, the quest, if you will, for scientific truth is being truncated, retarded by a rush to judgment. People want to know what's true. And so what we've replaced truth with is with scientific consensus. If a broad-based and vocal component of the scientific community proposes an idea, and if enough are in agreement, then that is accepted as truth. And it becomes very difficult to challenge it. It becomes very difficult to present a counter argument because now you are regarded as being foolish, wrong. You know, it's been decided, it's settled. And science is very rarely settled. I'll give an example of settled science. I think I've done this before. I think I've said this before. Settled science affirms that the freezing point of water is 0 degrees Celsius. And that's settled science. 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius, water freezes. And that is achieved by experimentation and then replication. You do it over and over and over again. Doesn't matter whether you're doing the experiments on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or any other day of the week, or in December, January, July, August, any month of the year, the freezing point of water never changes, so it's settled. When it comes to other things, though, we get into trouble at the putting things in the context of COVID. When the so-called vaccines first rolled out, the consensus scientific view that we were presented with, the great unwashed, we were told that the COVID vaccines would provide long-lasting, durable, and sustaining immunity to infection. And that if you can't get infected, then you can't transmit. And, we've done enough research and enough studies that we now know, we were told, we know that these vaccines are highly effective, not just effective, highly effective, incredibly effective, and incredibly safe. And as we found out, many people base the decision to get to roll up their sleeves on this notion that 2 doses of the COVID jabs, that they would provide long-lasting, durable, robust immunity to infection. And that we found out that was total horseshit. Sorry for the swearing, but that's what it was, horseshit. People are now up to shot number 8. And that what was stated as fact, and now, well, we think it'll protect you for somewhere between 3 to 6 months, but then you're going to need another shot, and you're going to have to get injections basically for the rest of your life. I mean, once you get onto the COVID train, seems like there's a jab train, until you suffer a blood clot heart attack or you die somehow, you're stuck with them. But I'm digressing, as I often like to do. When it comes to creation versus evolution, I said I had a nuanced view. I don't like to straw man things. I don't like to present the argument with which I disagree as being something weak and stupid and ridiculous. And when we talk about evolution, I mean, we can take things right back to the very beginning of time and the scientific view that's presented, and it's presented as the consensus truth. So people don't question it, like they didn't question the long-lasting, durable, robust protection to infection that the COVID vaccines we were told would provide. People don't question things, so they don't question the Big Bang Theory. And the Big Bang Theory, as I understand it, holds that at the beginning of time, that all the sum total of energy and matter that exists in the universe now, that at the beginning it was contained within a tiny little speck, which is sometimes referred to as the singularity, a tiny little dot, no bigger than a quark. And that for whatever reason, there was a massive explosion, a Big Bang. And then for millions, probably billions of years, you now have space and you have matter basically floating around chaotically in space. And then out of this chaotic disorder, that order came into being, that order was established. And then it is held, you have the planets forming, the galaxies, and order becomes established. And then on a planet like Earth, like where we live, that somehow life came into existence, that there was a primordial soup and some chemical reactions took place, and that suddenly life came into being, and then evolution started, and small single-celled simple life forms evolved, random mutations took place, and more complex life forms came into being, and then more and more things just progressed. Human beings were said to be kind of the apex of this evolutionary chain that took place again over millions, maybe billions of years. that we're the pinnacle to date. Maybe it might be suggested that in in a few more million years, we'll evolve even further. Who knows? Um, the biggest issue I have with this theory isn't with the Big Bang itself, isn't with this notion of the singularity and this explosion. The questions I ask about that are, number one, what existed outside of this singularity? And we're told that the universe is constantly expanding. And the question I have is, expanding into what? Rudimentary questions that I know some take exception to, because they contend that space doesn't exist; it is created somehow, and that it's just the natural order of things for things to get larger. Um, I don't have an issue with that. My question is the first mover, and when it comes to spontaneous or this primordial soup and some chemical reaction or something taking place, that life, a term that's used is spontaneous generation, life from lifeless matter. You have lifeless compounds, some enzymes, some proteins, and such, and something happens to bring them somehow magically to life. And that's one area where I have a big issue, because for the simple reason that for 100 plus years, going back to Louis Pasteur, and maybe a little before him and certainly after him, scientists have conducted all types of experiments to try and prove Darwin's theory about the origin of species, that lifeless matter can somehow be animated, that it can somehow be brought to life. And Louis Pasteur did experiments on it, and he eventually reached the scientific conclusion, and something there is a scientific consensus around, and that is the assertion that only life can create life. Life begats life. Inert matter cannot begat life. But that we have we have something of a paradox. We have those who ascribe to scientific thinking, who reject they accept the consensus view on evolution, but they reject the consensus view of only life begatting life, of only life creating life. And this is a paradox, because if only life can produce life, well, then Darwin's theory at its very starting point is unproven and disproven in point of fact, because, as I said, every experiment conducted trying to prove that inanimate compounds can be brought to life has failed. Now, what has come out of that is a new theory, a relatively new theory. Don't have to go back as far as Darwin. I don't know when exactly this theory was proposed, but doesn't matter. The theory is called abiogenesis. I used to say abiogenesis, but I've been corrected and told that the proper pronunciation is abiogenesis. And if someone is amoral, they have no morals. If someone is atheistic, they do not believe in God. So when you stick abiogenesis means you don't need this concept, according to abiogenesis, you don't need life to create life. And the contention is that for a specific period of time, there was a window of time in the distant past, maybe 1 billion or more years ago, that during a specified period of time, there was a window there where the conditions needed to animate non-organic, non-living matter that the conditions necessary to create life did exist for a specific period of time, but now that window is closed. And so that's why all the experiments fail, is because the conditions required to create life from inanimate matter only existed for, again, this prescribed indeterminate period of time, but a specific window. And now that window is closed. And so whenever we experiment, we don't have the right conditions because the proper conditions only existed for a period of time. They have done experiments where they've tried to replicate what they assume to be the conditions on planet Earth billions of years ago, what it would have been like in our oceans with thermal gases and different chemicals and different compounds floating around, and how the chemical reactions they would have in this type of environment with thermal heat, volcanic heat coming from below the surface of the earth and all that. And they actually have, in these experiments, as I understand it, they've created some basic organic compounds like enzymes and maybe proteins, which are components of life. They're components of life, but they're not life. They're not living. It's not living matter. It's not an organism. It's a component of enzymes and proteins, and these things are components of life, but they're not life itself. I mean, it's basically like the analogy I'll draw is if you have a bunch of lumber, some nails, and other building materials just lying on the ground, well, that's the potential for a house. But in order for it to become a house, you need builders. You need someone to actually build the house. If you leave those components just lying on the ground and come back in 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, assuming something of a vacuum environment, they're still just going to be lying there. So I do have an issue with this notion that life came into being. I have a problem with evolution at its core basic start, which states that it was just some accident that happened, some chemical reaction happened, and all of a sudden, poof, life came into being. And I think, morally speaking, because so much in our world today, I mean, it's part of, I think it's part of the meaning of life is seeking truth, seeking truths, seeking that which is real and true and eternally true. And in a worldview that holds that life itself is just the result of a random accident, and that then it just followed a bunch of random mutations, that there's no design, that there's no order, that there's no first mover. Well, then human beings, for example, we're just a random mutation or two from not existing. And so where do you find truth in a universe, in a worldview where everything is just random accidents? If that is true, well, then things like morality have no bearing. In the way I see it, I don't see how you can bring any concept of moralism into the world if you hold to an atheistic evolutionary worldview. And I'm talking about evolution at the root, at the beginning. I do believe that organisms, that life forms evolve over time. There's a great example. There's a bird called a rail, a white-throated rail, which is indigenous to Madagascar. And from Madagascar, this bird has populated other areas. And there are some islands in the Indian Ocean, and I believe they're called, I may not be pronouncing it right, but I think they're called the Seychelles Islands. And these white-throated rail birds populated some islands on an atoll, Atoll. And because on these islands, these islets, this atoll, because there are no natural predators to the white-throated rail, that over a period of years, maybe, and I don't think we're going back millions, we're going back hundreds, thousands or so, these birds evolved to become flightless. They were flightless birds. However, what happened. Now, evolutionary theory would hold that the reason this bird evolved into a flightless bird would be because of just random mutations. And the random mutation that led to flightlessness was advantageous. And so, in terms of procreating, the flightless birds became the dominant, and the birds that could fly, even though they didn't need to because they had no natural predators, they died off, and only this evolved species of this white-throated rail survived. However, what happened, and has apparently happened repeatedly, it's happened 2 or 3 times, maybe more, these atolls, these islands, uh, have been flooded completely, submerged underwater, killing all life on it. And then the oceans have receded and the atolls have reappeared. And then these white-throated rails have flown back to these islands. And then the same random mutations, if you hold the evolutionary happen, these 1 in a million chances happened again and again. They happened repeatedly. It's supposed to be random mutations, 1 in a million chance, and yet they happened again, and they've happened at least twice and perhaps more times, according to the studies I've read on them. What that tells me, the view I take on it, is that rather than calling it evolution, and I don't have a problem with that word, but I think a better word might be adaptability. Living organisms are programmed to be adaptable to their environments and to evolve, to adapt to their environments. And I don't see that as being random mutations. I see it as being part of the programming, if you will, into life forms. We are programmed to adapt to the environment in which we live. And I do think it takes hundreds, maybe thousands of years. I don't think it takes millions. But getting back to the moralistic view, I mean, if you hold, I find it curious that so many who assert an atheistic, no God, no creation, everything's just a random accident, who express this worldview, they also, though, have very strong moralistic opinions. You can talk about the conflict that's going on between Israel and Hamas, between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And there are people who have an atheistic worldview who will be adamantly asserting one side as being right over the other, but they're doing this from an atheistic worldview, and I find that curious because it's all just and I don't want to straw man it. It's not my intention, but I mean, if life is just the result of a series of random and basically meaningless accidents, random mutations, then there's no what does it matter who's right or wrong? Because consciousness is, doesn't fit into the equation of evolutionary theory. So why even worry about it? I mean, live your life to the fullest, ignore the needs of your fellow human beings, and ignore conflicts and trying to determine who's right or wrong. I mean, there's a concept that came out early in the 20th century. It was called social Darwinism, this idea of survival of the fittest, which in turn led to eugenics, which is something that the Nazis ran with. And we saw the results of that. And eugenics as a philosophical worldview, eugenics has never gone away. There's still an element of eugenic thoughts in places like I hear it when I listen to the World Economic Forum and a guy like Noah Harari, or Noah Yuval, I forget, Harari is his last name. I think his first name is Yuval, Y-U-V-A-L, Noah Harari. And he seems, to my ears, to be very big on eugenics and directed evolution, and managing who gets to procreate and that kind of thing. Refers to a lot of humanity as basically useless eaters, as useless consumers of this planet's precious resources, etc. I find the abandonment of a theistic worldview to be incredibly problematic for the issue for basic humanity. If we take God out of the equation, we are in, well, I think we're seeing the end result of it now. I live in Canada. We now have MAID, medical assistance in dying. Sadly, without going into specifics, I do have firsthand personal knowledge of someone who opted for MAID, medical assistance in dying. Famously, it came out that there was a Canadian Armed Forces veteran, a woman, who contacted Veterans Affairs because she lived in a walk-up. She had to get to her front door. I guess she was in a raised bungalow or something like that, but she would have to drag her wheelchair down the stairs and up the stairs to get to the main floor, where the main living space of her residence. And so she called Veterans Affairs Canada, and she was requesting like one of those acorn chairlift things to take her up and down the stairs. And the employee with Veterans Affairs suggested to her that, well, we could make medical assistance in dying available to you. Long pause on purpose. Think about who gets to determine what life is valuable. And it's a sad state of affairs that we're in this world. And in terms of creation versus evolution, I do see this breakdown as used to be that science was presented as an investigative process and something that involves constant questioning and constant experimentation and constantly challenging the prevailing accepted view. However, now, especially in the last 15, 20 years, now we've come to this idea of consensus science, and people think that whatever is presented as the consensus scientific view, that not only is it the consensus, but it is fact and it is true, and anyone who challenges the consensus accepted scientific view is stupid, ignorant, and not worth engaging with. And this is incredibly dangerous. I mentioned it in terms of the COVID vaccines, or the so-called vaccines, and I put it in quotes, and I call them so-called vaccines, because if you look up the definition of what a vaccine is supposed to be, what it is, vaccine is a substance or causative agent that confers immunity. This is why they have alternately been called immunizations, because when you have immunity to something, you do not get it. And we were presented late 2020, early 2021, with this scientific consensus fact that the COVID jabs, that they would confer long-lasting, robust immunity. Sterilizing immunity was another word they used, sterilizing, a complete barrier to getting COVID now. You get these two magic little pokes, and COVID can't come near you. There's a Rachel Nadeau, who's on CNBC, a famous talking head. And she was, the virus stops with each vaccinated person. You cannot get infected. And that was spread far and wide. Anyone who came along and challenged that, they were accused of spreading, of lying, of spreading misinformation, disinformation. And their Wikipedia page would say, this person is known to spread COVID misinformation, disinformation. There's a gentleman, Dr. Geert Vanden Bossche, who famously said in March or April of 2021, he said that if we do a mass vaccination program, that it will lead to the emergence of multiple variants that will defeat any vaccine-generated antibodies. And so we'll have even more infections and things will be even worse. And he was called a quack. He was called a spreader of misinformation and disinformation. However, as things turned out, we found out less than a year later, we had Omicron, and he was vindicated. But most people don't even know it because he's been shut out and put to the side because he was spreading misinformation, disinformation. And there are people to this day, well, they say, well, the science wasn't wrong. Yes, the science in of itself, science is a process, or a process if you're an American. Science is a process, and it doesn't stop. You keep investigating, you keep learning, your knowledge of what is true evolves over time. So I do believe in evolution, but I also believe in creation, the first mover. There had to be a creator. I look at, I know I'm going all over the place, but what the heck, it's my channel, I can say what I want. There has to be a first mover. And I think a lot of my view stems from the fact, because my faith has grown exponentially since 2015, when I moved to a small rural area in southeastern Ontario, a little tiny town of less than 12,000 people. I could go for a half-hour walk, and I'm surrounded by fields and forest and being completely removed from, all I see is nature. I don't have to drive for an hour. Now, contrast that with prior to 2015. Before 2015, I was living in Quebec City, which is a large urban center. 600,000 people live in Quebec City proper itself. There's about 1 million people living in the general area of Quebec City. But before that, I've lived in Toronto, in New York City, in Portland, Oregon, lived around the GTA. I've spent most of my life living either in a big city or in the suburban area, very close to a big city. And when you live in that context, when you look at the landscape, you see man-made creations. When I lived in Toronto, I saw the skyscrapers, the bank towers, the CN Tower, the Sky Dome, or whatever it's called now, where the Blue Jays play. And you see these majestic, incredible buildings that are created by human hands, that are man-made creations. But when you live now, where I live now, when you live out in the sticks, and I can look out on on Lake Ontario, and I see the swans and the ducks and the loons and the marshlands and the forests, and there's, I can't even hear cars, and I can see the sky. I mean, I was in downtown Toronto. Oh, I don't go downtown much. Last time I was in Toronto, I think it would have been 2021, and I was at an event that was taking place at Nathan Phillips Square in front of Toronto City Hall, and you can't even see the sky, the sun. It was wintertime, and you really were thankful for the sun, but the sun was constantly being blotted out by all the skyscrapers. You get a brief little few minutes as it passed between one skyscraper and the next. And so you're cut off from the natural world, what I consider God's creation. And you're surrounded when you're in an urban center, you're faced with man's creation, and you elevate man and you push God down. But living in the country or in a very rural setting like I do now I see the wonder of God's incredible creation every single day, and it cannot help but impact one's worldview. And I genuinely, so these are things that I ponder and think about a lot. Just my youngest is 10 years of age, gray, and my white beard notwithstanding, my youngest is only 10, and I worry about the world he's growing up into, into a world where truth is now based on feelings and subjective feelings. And this notion of the trans rights movement, this notion that something as basic as gender is now considered a societal construct by many. And people will say to you, well, this is the accepted consensus scientific view, and that so it represents fact. Because I've got 100 scientists that I can cite who are all proposing this idea, well, it's got to be true. And the simple fact of the matter is, gender is binary. There's male and there's female. There is a rare condition called intersex, where someone's chromosomes can be messed up. I think where we get confused is distinguishing between behavior and gender. While gender, we have male and female, we have behavior. And behavior, there is absolutely 100% a spectrum. There are men who can display behaviors which are more typically associated with the feminine, and there are women who can display behaviors that are more typically displayed among the masculine, but that doesn't change their gender. Just because a guy feels more comfortable dressing as a woman or putting on makeup or engaging in other behaviors that are seen as feminine, just because they do that, that doesn't change the reality of the fact that they have an X and a Y chromosome, that they have a penis and testicles. Likewise, a woman, she can identify, through her behavior and display more masculine traits, but that doesn't eliminate her ovaries, her uterus, and her vagina. And we get into science. Science is being perverted now, in my view, completely, because we have the ability to do things. We have the ability. They've come out with these drugs called puberty blockers, which will prevent prepubescent child from going into puberty. So a boy doesn't have to experience male puberty, or a girl doesn't have to experience female puberty. And these drugs have dangerous side effects, one of which is the reduction of bone density. So you can imagine having a child taking a drug that's going a child whose body is still developing, and drugs are being given to them that reduce their bone density. Basically, as I understand it, that's osteoporosis. That's a disease that most often impacts elderly geriatric women, and now we're giving this condition to children. And then that's to say nothing of the mutilating surgeries that take place. Teenage girls or younger having breast tissue removed, double mastectomies, having their uteruses removed, and we're doing it to children. But from an atheistic worldview, and assuming that there's no ultimate right, no ultimate wrong, there's no creator, everything's just a random accident, well, hey, fill your boots. And I think it would be helpful if I find it curious that so many with an atheistic worldview who do not believe. I've stayed away from talking about the Bible because you can believe in God, you can believe in a creator, but that does not necessarily mean you have to believe in the God of the Bible. And I'm going to continue this discussion, and this will be the topic of my next video. Might do it tomorrow night or the next. But talking about why I view the Bible as being authoritative. I tend to break away from some of my evangelical brothers and sisters in Christ in that I do not hold to a doctrine or a belief in inerrancy. That is to say, I don't believe the Bible is perfect. And there are many Christians, professing Christians, many, who hold to a doctrine or a profession of inerrancy, meaning the Bible is perfect, that every word in there, more or less, God ordained that it should be there. And but regardless of whether, and I don't want to argue with my brothers and sisters in Christ who hold to this inerrant view of Scripture, but I do hold that it is both sufficient, meaning there's more than enough there, to lead a good life and for God to shower his blessings on you. There's more than enough. And that it is authoritative. It's both sufficient and authoritative. And why I view it as being those two things. But you can believe in a creator God, but not necessarily have to view the Bible as being the ultimate source. There are all kinds of views out there. So when I do my next video, I'll talk about that. But I've rambled on enough. This has been a real stream of consciousness. Again, I didn't script anything out. I didn't talk about half the things I was planning to. Never know exactly what direction my brain's going to take me in when I go into one of these. But thank you. I see I had someone give me a thumbs up. I have someone watching. If you want to leave a comment in the live chat on the side, you can, because I'm going to sign off in a second. And as always, subscriptions are appreciated. I think we're entering incredibly tumultuous times. I've been talking too much about the war in Israel, but I think it's monumentally significant. Yemen, the Yemenites, I guess they're called, or Yemenis, I'm not sure. Yemen has become heavily involved in the conflict. Yemen's involved in a civil war right now. Over the last almost 10 years, I think their civil war started in 2014. And according to human rights organizations in the UN, in and around somewhere close to in and around 400,000 people have been killed, many women and children, and not just killed in the fighting, but killed due to starvation and killed or dying due to a lack of access to medical care. But no one cares about it. We care. People are deeply emotionally invested in what's happening in the Gaza Strip. But Yemen, well, the news didn't tell me to care about it. The news didn't program me what to think, how to feel about that, so I don't worry about it. The news told me to think about this, and they told me what to think, what to believe, and how to feel about it, so I'm emotionally invested in that. And this is why I'm so incredibly fixated. I do think what's happening in Israel right now is incredibly important globally. Doesn't matter whether you're in Canada, the United States, Israel itself, or anywhere else in the world. I said the Bible is both, in my worldview, is both authoritative and sufficient, and that includes their prophetic messages from the prophets about so-called end times theology or eschatology. And I think it's very incredibly possible that we are going to see the world's armies, Israel being surrounded. But I was talking about the Houthis, and they've taken over pretty much all of Yemen, including the capital, and now they have begun launching attacks on merchant cargo ships traveling in the Red Sea. Initially, I was just reading an article in Al Jazeera. I don't like to stay in my echo chamber. I read a lot of articles from Al Jazeera because I understand their bias, but their reporting isn't bad, and it allows me to see things from a different perspective. But anyway, even Al Jazeera was saying that initially they were announcing that they were going to attack ships that were owned by Israeli companies, and then they expanded it to include ships that were bound for Israel, and now it appears as though it is expanded to include basically any ships traveling along the coastline of Yemen. And so now the U.S. has brought together another so-called coalition of the willing to try and protect these shipping routes. However, it was an interesting article because, and this is again, Al Jazeera, which I consider to be the CNN of the Arab world, of the Islamic world. They were saying that the U.S., from a militaristic point of view, the ideal situation is to, attack Yemen and their drones and their missiles. Apparently, they fired missiles and sent drones out attacking these merchant ships. Well, rather than merely having defense shields or these military vessels intercepting these drones and these rockets, that ideally the United States would want to go in and destroy their capability by attacking the source, attack the installations that are sending out these drones and rockets. But that would be such an open declaration of war, that would be so seen as being so openly hostile, that the fear is that that would lead to an escalation in the current conflict between Israel and Hamas. And the U.S., so they're kind of walking a tightrope. They want to protect the shipping lanes, but they don't want to escalate the war in Gaza. And so they're doing kind of a half measure of trying to protect the shipping lanes, because the Red Sea is a major sea port, or not a seaport, wrong language. It's a major lane, a major sea lane of commercial traffic. And if it were to be shut down, and this Al Jazeera article seemed to speculate that there's very real potential for those sea lanes, these shipping lanes, to be completely shut down. But I'm going way off. Thank you again for watching. Appreciate the thumb up, and we'll talk to you later. Ending stream. God bless.